Today's topic is about conflict and how, as coaches, we shape conflict, not how we avoid it or not how we act like it's not present, not how we just respond to it, but how we shape it. Conflict is something it's present on every team. It's not something we can avoid. One issue we've talked about this class has been culture, the culture of a team. The BEATS model is something that helps to shape a culture. Conflict is something that reveals our culture in a very kind of clear and powerful way, sometimes when we're not ready for it on our team. Conflict is something that it can be kind of a immediate thing that comes up that we don't see coming. It catches us off guard. Some incident occurs or some crisis occurs, or more commonly, conflict can be something that subtly simmers. It kind of subtly builds within the culture of a team, but can really undercut everything we're doing. So the discussion of conflict, again, like other aspects, like aspects of the BEATS model, this is not necessarily an aspect of the BEATS model, but it very much relates to those aspects of the BEATS model. And in some ways, if we think really purposefully about those 5 aspects of the BEATS model, we can address conflict pretty well. But I want to talk about some specific aspects of conflict and how we as coaches or as leaders should really be thinking about it, or could really be thinking about it. There's a literature on conflict within organizations, a body of research that it talks about a conflict culture that emerges in every organization. A conflict culture, it's not exactly what it sounds like. So if I use the term conflict culture, it might sound like we have an organizational culture or a team culture that is troubled by conflict. That's not what I mean here. That's not what this term means. This term means, what is the culture that addresses conflict on a team? What is our conflict culture, or within an organization? How do we handle conflict? So every team has a conflict culture of some kind. Every team has a way that they respond to conflict. 3 of the kind of most common kind of categories, of course, it's never this clean in every organization or any team, but 3 of the kind of broad categories that we talk about, how conflict is handled, are what you see here. So one is called a dominating conflict culture. As I'm going through these, I would like you to think about your own team now, or teams that you've had, or organizations you've worked in if you're not a coach. And bring to mind examples that fit each of these, because I would imagine you can think of examples in each of these areas. So one of the first kind of conflict cultures that is common on teams is what we could call a dominating conflict culture, which what that means is that when some incident occurs, or when some disagreement happens, or any sort of conflict occurs, this type of a culture resolves it or addresses it with a winner and a loser. Someone wins, someone loses. Someone was right, someone was wrong. Someone gets off, someone gets punished. It's kind of a dichotomous response to conflict. Not good, obviously. We do not want to have a dominating conflict culture, but we often have that. We'll talk a little bit more about this. I'm going to go to the bottom one next, the third one, which is an avoidant conflict culture. I would imagine that just about every team has some aspect of this. What this means is that we do not acknowledge the conflicts that are present. We act like it's not there. And, as a coach, I'll put myself in this category, and I know a lot of coaches would fit in this as well. We aim for kind of control, or we want things to be in order on our team. We don't want things that we can't control for. We don't really want people doing things that are unexpected. We don't want incidents coming up that might distract our team. We don't want things that are off of our kind of, like I said, out of our control to occur. But if we're too strong that way, we can develop a real avoidant conflict culture, which means that not only do we try to control things too much, but we miss conflicts that are right in front of us. So an avoidant conflict culture is one that doesn't acknowledge problems, doesn't acknowledge conflict on a team. Very common. I think the first one I said, the dominant culture and the avoidant culture, are both really, really common aspects of, or very, very common kind of conflict cultures. The middle one is often where we would maybe aspire to be, which is more of a collaborative conflict culture where there's cooperation and active participation. And this means that when there is a conflict, when there is a problem, there is kind of a mutual understanding of why it occurred. There's a mutual kind of maybe a discussion about why it occurred, or a response that is of benefit or of best, of soundest decision for multiple people. There's not just always a loser and a winner every time there's a conflict. There's not an avoidance of a conflict. So a collaborative conflict culture, it does not mean that everyone gets to say in why this conflict happens. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be okay and everybody's going to feel all right about it. But what it means is that there's a collaborative response to it. There's multiple kind of perspectives brought in and respected, and often conflict can become a very positive thing if handled right. So that sounds counterintuitive, but the research really shows us that if we really look at the top organizations, if we really look at top teams, they have been able to take conflict and make it a positive, and to learn from the conflict. So if we avoid it, if we use it to dominate others, those are ways that conflict can bring us down. If we learn from it and collaborate around culture or around conflict, we can see positives from it. A distinction that I think we need to think about is the bottom bullet here, which is that there are really differences between mature teams and developing ones. A mature team, I don't mean mature in terms of like everybody acts like adults all the time. I don't mean that kind of mature. I mean a mature team means a team that's been together and has a very identifiable culture. So, I mean, you could think of, I have a son who's in 8th grade and has had a group of boys on the same basketball team, the same group of boys essentially, for the last about 5 years. It's the same group of boys. They've been playing together since they were little, 5 or 6 years. A lot of those boys are very immature as individuals. However, their team has a very mature culture, a very mature culture. What I mean by that is they've been together for a while. Everybody kind of knows who is who. They know what's acceptable, what's not acceptable on their team. They know who fits what roles. And they largely are able to function as a unit. Not always well, but it's a mature culture because they've been together a while, they have experience together, they understand how they work together. There could be other teams. I mean, it could be a professional team, it could be an NHL hockey team that is a very kind of developing culture, meaning it's a relatively new unit of people, a lot of people in and out. So conflict cultures are very different depending on whether we have a mature culture or a developing culture, and that's something we need to think about as a coach as we're addressing conflict. I've already kind of talked about some of the outcomes of different conflict cultures, but this is what research shows us about, a dominating conflict culture can lead to burnout, it can lead to players and coaches burning out, and it can create more conflict. A collaborative culture brings buy-in and more cohesion on a team. An avoidant conflict culture, even though we initially are not having to deal with it, or more accurately, because we're not initially dealing with it, we get isolation, we get less creativity, and ultimately a very negative thing for a team. So this is a central aspect of being a leader, is how do we deal with conflict? And all leaders have conflict. All leaders of the most simple organizations, but especially in something as kind of competitive and as kind of relational as coaching a sport team, we will have conflict at all levels. So one of my biggest recommendations to you as someone thinking about coaching or developing as a coach is to really give due diligence about what you will do and how you will shape your culture relating to conflict. Don't act like it's not going to happen. It will happen. How will you deal with it? I encourage you to really think about the 5 aspects of BEATS, to think about that, about how you will deal with culture. And then I'm going to just close with a couple of other recommendations. So, on most teams, we talk about these kinds of things. We talk about what are our goals as a team, what are the different roles you're going to have on a team, or tasks, the strategies we'll have. This is all very kind of basic stuff. Most teams will have this, whether you have a handbook or you have kind of meetings that go over all these things. But less commonly addressed on teams and very much related to our conflict culture are these kinds of things. Like, what kinds of language will we use? And I don't mean just like we avoid bad language. I mean, what kinds of language do we use to communicate with one another? What are the boundaries between, say, coaches and team, different members of the team and different staff? Like, whose role is what, essentially? And some of these, the criteria for power, criteria for rewards and punishment, and how we will make meaning when the unexplainable things happen. And I'll tell you what I mean by that as I finish here. That last one is, how do we make meaning among the unexplainable? The unexplainable could be a conflict. Something happens, we just can't. It could be a tragedy. It could be a small kind of surprise, or something that we couldn't have anticipated. How do we make meaning of that? How do we make sense of it? I would say that one way we can do that is what we could call the way we transmit culture, and in particular these kind of 3 things as coaches: role modeling, what we pay attention to, and how you react to critical incidences. These are the mechanisms of culture transmitting that coaches have the kind of most, or I should say the strongest influence. So first of all, role modeling. When conflict happens, the eyes go to the coach. How does the coach respond? Let's think about your own team experiences. Think about maybe some of the biggest conflicts you've experienced on a team. How did the coach respond? Did the coach kind of fly off the handle? Did the coach get especially angry or exert dominant influence over one particular individual? Or did the coach act like the conflict wasn't there? Or was the coach really skillful in responding to it? What did the coach pay attention to? Did the coach pay attention to just maybe it was a fight occurred on a team? Maybe there was a fist fight in the locker room. Did the coach pay attention to just the incident that occurred, or was there a deeper recognition of bigger things going on? The last note, which is similar to the first 2, is how do you react to critical incidents? You've heard kind of the phrase of kind of keeping cool under pressure, or of someone who's a steady influence. Coaches don't always have to be perfect, but the way we respond to critical incidents can really it can overshadow, in a positive or negative way, everything we've talked about up until that point. So I give an example of a high school basketball coach that I used to work with. I didn't coach with him, but I used to observe him. He was the most organized coach. He was the most prepared coach in in every way that I'd ever experienced. He had these really great coaching handbooks. He ran a great practice, very organized, had a really good scheme that he ran, was really good at getting the team kind of motivated and practicing hard every day. But when it came to this last thing, how do you respond to critical incidents, there were a couple of kind of conflicts on the team with kids, with behavior, and he lost his cool and did not respond well. And I don't just mean he yelled a lot, but he did things that were not appropriate and not good for anyone. And so everything he had done before that, all the work he had put in, all the homework he had done, all the off-season clinics, all the preparation, all the conditioning that the kids did, a lot of it was undercut because of the way the coach responded to conflict. And so it's not like we can just say, when a conflict occurs, I will do this. It's a little deeper than that. It's a little bit more kind of self-reflective about why do we do the work that we do? Why do we coach? Why do we lead? So I encourage you to really think about that. Reflect upon how you have responded to critical incidents in the past, and how would you do so in the future? Because that's a real culture transmitter that almost can I could say the flip side as well. Like a lot of other coaches maybe are not, they have deficiencies in a lot of areas, but they're so good at handling kind of these types of things that it actually it can help the team kind of mobilize across other weaknesses. So your capacity to deal with conflict on a team can actually become one of your great assets. It can become really a positive for your team. The easiest example we've read a little bit about in the book is Doc Rivers. In the book we read about there's a major conflict with the Los Angeles Clippers owner. This guy, you've all probably followed this, but said these really kind of racist things. And all the eyes went to Doc Rivers, who was the head coach and the leader of the team, and he handled it so well that the team bonded, and his status as the coach has only increased since that occurred because of the way he responded to conflict. We could surely think of a lot of other coaches who have had conflict situations and they've handled them not well at all. So I encourage you to think through two questions just finally here. What are the conflicts that you've experienced as a leader? And I've been a lot of conflicts, but maybe think of a couple, especially, one or two especially noteworthy conflicts. It could have been when you were a young kid, or it could have been last week. Kind of think them through. Why did they happen? What happened? What are the details? And then think about these things relating to them. How did role modeling, leaders' attention within the team or organization, so again, what did the leader pay attention to, and leader reaction to the crisis shape how the crisis played out? So a conflict or a crisis often plays out at a certain time, but its effects go on longer. And those effects, as I said, they can get worse and worse until the point that they undercut a team, or the effects can be positive. So there could be a problem, a conflict that occurs, and it might end up playing out over the long haul in a very positive way, which is obviously where we would want it, how we'd want it to be. So I ask you to reflect upon those questions. This could be information overload when you hear all these things, but the big point here in this little module is to say that we as coaches need to understand, to recognize conflict as a part of the work. If you're a leader, conflict is part of the work. There will be conflict. Think about it, and think about a plan for how you will respond. It's a critical part of the work.